Clara never thought her life would take such a quiet turn after marrying David for years. Her days followed a calm routine, waking early, making coffee, reading before work, then spending evenings in front of the fireplace with a book or an old movie. It wasn't exciting, but it was safe. When David's son, Jake, moved in for the summer after finishing college, Clara didn't expect much to change. She thought he'd stay in his room, busy with his internship, and they'd only exchange polite small talk at dinner. But she was wrong. Jake's presence brought a new kind of energy into the house. He was polite but quiet, focused but sometimes distant, as if carrying a storm of thoughts he couldn't quite put into words. Clara noticed how he'd stay up late in the living room, papers spread across the table, laptop open. Frustration etched across his face. At first, she kept her distance. He was an adult, and she didn't want to interfere. But as days passed, she couldn't ignore the growing concern in her heart. One evening, while making tea, Clara glanced toward the living room and saw Jake staring blankly at the screen, his head resting in his hands. She hesitated, then walked over. "You've been sitting there for hours," she said softly. "You need a break." Jake looked up, startled. "Oh, hey, Clara. Yeah, I know. I'm just stuck. It's for my internship. I have this presentation due, and I can't get it right." She smiled kindly. "Want to tell me about it? Maybe talking will help." He hesitated, then nodded. "It's this project about consumer behavior. I have to design a report that shows how people's choices change under stress. But my mentor hasn't been helping much, and I feel like I'm failing." Clara sat down across from him. Her curiosity piqued. "That's interesting. I read a lot about similar topics when I was working in marketing years ago. Maybe I can help." Jake's eyes brightened with hope. "Really? You'd do that?" "Of course," she said, trying to sound casual even though she felt oddly nervous. "Let's see what you've got." They spent the next hour going through his notes. Clara suggested small changes, reorganized a few ideas, and pointed out areas that could be clearer. Jake listened carefully, taking notes like a student eager to learn. For the first time in weeks, he smiled a real grateful smile. "Wow," he said softly. "This makes so much sense now. Thank you, Clara. You're really good at this." She brushed it off with a shy laugh. "It's just experience. You'll get there." That night, as Clara lay in bed, she thought about the conversation. There was something touching about Jake's trust in her. He had grown up mostly with his mother after David's first marriage ended. And although Clara had tried to build a connection since marrying David 5 years ago, Jake had always kept a polite distance. This moment felt like a breakthrough, small but meaningful. The next evening, Jake approached her again, holding a notebook. "Hey, Clara, I was wondering, could you help me again? I made some changes based on what you said, but I'm not sure it's right." Clara hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Sure, let's look at it together." Over the next few days, this became their quiet routine. After dinner, they'd sit in the living room side by side working on his project. Clara would explain, Jake would listen, and together they'd refine his work. She enjoyed it more than she expected. Helping him made her feel useful, even alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. Jake had been quiet all day, barely speaking during dinner. After clearing the table, he appeared in the doorway, hands shoved in his pockets. "Clara, can I ask you something?" His tone was serious, almost nervous. Clara turned off the TV. "Of course, Jake. What's wrong?" He hesitated, eyes shifting between her and the floor. I don't really know how to say this. It's not about work. It's more personal." Clara's stomach tightened. "Okay, go on." He took a deep breath. "I know this might sound weird, but could I talk to you sometimes? Like, really talk? You're easy to talk to, and I don't feel judged when I'm around you." For a moment, Clara didn't know what to say. His voice was soft but filled with sincerity. "Of course," she finally said. "You can talk to me about anything." Jake smiled faintly, relief washing over his face. "Thanks. I just haven't had someone to talk to like that for a while." That night, their conversation stretched for hours. Jake opened up about the pressure of adulthood, about feeling like he was never enough for anyone: his father, his professors, even himself. Clara listened without interrupting, her heart aching for him. She offered small pieces of advice, shared her own past struggles, and reminded him that mistakes were part of growing up. When Jake finally thanked her and went to bed, Clara sat quietly in the dim light of the living room, feeling something shift. She hadn't realized how much she missed being needed, how fulfilling it was to guide someone with care and patience. The next morning, as she made breakfast, David kissed her cheek and left for work. Jake joined her a few minutes later, his usual guarded expression replaced by a relaxed smile. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "Thanks for last night. It really helped." Clara smiled back. "I'm glad. Any time, Jake." From then on, their bond grew in small, subtle ways. Jake started helping her around the house, offering to carry groceries or cook dinner. He'd ask her opinion on things not just about his project, but about life. "What made you choose to be with my dad?" he asked once, half curious, half shy. Clara laughed softly. "He made me feel safe, and he listens." "That's rare." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, you both balance each other." There was something heartwarming about their exchanges. They weren't mother and son, not quite, but their growing connection felt like an unspoken friendship rooted in trust, respect, and quiet understanding. One evening, after another long study session, Jake suddenly said, "Clara, can I make a request?" His tone was cautious but earnest. "Sure," she said, setting down her pen. "What is it?" He hesitated, then looked straight at her. "Would it be okay if we worked outside sometimes? Maybe at a cafe or the library? I just feel like a change of place could help me think better." It was such a simple request, yet Clara hesitated for a second. She thought about how it might look her, sitting alone with her grown stepson, but then she dismissed the thought. Jake's intention was genuine, and she didn't want to discourage him. "That sounds nice," she said finally. "We could go this weekend if you'd like." Jake's relief was instant. "Really, thank you. That means a lot." As he left the room, Clara found herself smiling without realizing it. She couldn't explain it, but there was something deeply fulfilling about being trusted like this. Helping Jake wasn't just about mentoring him, it was about rediscovering her own confidence, her sense of purpose, her quiet strength. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how life had shifted in just a few weeks. A small request had opened a new chapter, unexpected but meaningful. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in years, she felt that something important was happening. Something human, real, and quietly beautiful. Outside her window, the night was calm, the world asleep. But inside Clara's heart, something had awakened, something warm and alive, like hope after a long winter. And as she closed her eyes, she whispered to herself, maybe saying yes was the start of something good. Saturday morning arrived with golden sunlight spilling through the kitchen window. Clara woke early, feeling oddly restless. She brewed coffee, trying to calm her nerves, though she couldn't explain why she was nervous at all. Jake's request to spend the weekend working together at a cafe had seemed innocent enough, but something about it lingered in her thoughts. Maybe it was because it had been so long since she'd spent time one-on-one with anyone other than David. Or maybe because Jake, despite being her stepson, had a presence that stirred emotions she didn't fully understand. When Jake came downstairs, dressed neatly in jeans and a light gray sweater, Clara couldn't help but notice how much he'd grown from the boy she'd met years ago. He looked confident, yet still carried that gentle shyness that made him easy to talk to. "Ready for our little work session?" he asked with a grin. Clara smiled back. "Ready as ever. I even brought my notebook to look useful." They laughed, and the tension in her chest softened. They drove to a quiet cafe near the edge of town, one with brick walls and warm lighting. Jake ordered his usual black coffee, and Clara chose tea. They sat by the window, papers spread between them. The world outside passing slowly while their quiet conversation filled the space. For the first hour, they worked seriously. Jake showed her his updated presentation, and Clara gave feedback, helping him organize his ideas more clearly. But as time passed, their conversation drifted into more personal topics: music, dreams, and the small fears that often went unspoken. "I used to think my dad had everything figured out," Jake said, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "But now I see he's just as lost as the rest of us sometimes." Clara nodded gently. "No one ever really figures it out, Jake. We just get better at pretending we have." He looked at her with quiet admiration. "You always say things that make sense. I wish I had your calmness." She smiled softly. "That comes with time and a few hard lessons." There was a long, comfortable silence after that. Clara noticed the way light hit Jake's face, how his eyes seemed deeper when he listened. She quickly looked away, scolding herself for noticing such things. He was her stepson, and this was just a kind, human moment. That's all. By afternoon, they'd made real progress on his project. Jake leaned back, satisfied. "You know, Clara, I couldn't have done this without you. I mean it." She laughed lightly. "You're giving me too much credit. You just needed someone to believe in your ideas." Jake's gaze softened. "Then I'm glad it was you." The warmth of his words stayed with her all the way home. That evening, David called from his work trip, and Clara told him everything was fine. She didn't mention the cafe. It felt unnecessary to explain. After all, there was nothing wrong. Still, a faint uneasiness lingered in her chest, like the beginning of a feeling she couldn't quite name. The following week, Jake's presentation went perfectly. He came home glowing with pride. "Clara, they loved it. My mentor said it was one of the best in the program." She clapped her hands, genuinely happy. "That's wonderful, Jake. I told you you could do it." He smiled, then added softly, "You're the reason I did." From that day on, Jake seemed lighter, more confident. He started joining Clara in small things, helping in the kitchen, watching shows together, even walking with her in the evenings. It felt natural, like a friendship that had always been waiting to happen. Clara enjoyed his company more than she wanted to admit. One night, after dinner, they sat on the porch. The air was cool, and the sky glowed faintly pink. Jake looked thoughtful. "You know, Clara, I used to think you were just quiet because you didn't like me much." She blinked, surprised. "Why would you think that?" He shrugged. "I guess I didn't try to know you either. But now I see how much heart you have. You listen even when people don't say much." Her chest tightened with emotion. "Thank you, Jake. That means a lot." He turned to her with an almost childlike sincerity. "I'm really glad you're part of this family." It was such a simple thing to say, yet it struck her deeply. For years, she had felt like an outsider, David's wife, but not quite Jake's family. Hearing those words felt like healing an old wound she hadn't realized was still open. But as their bond grew, Clara began to notice whispers of misunderstanding forming in her mind, fears she didn't want to acknowledge. The late-night talks, the shared laughter, the easy comfort between them, it was all innocent. But she could sense the world might see it differently. She tried to set boundaries, reminding herself of what was right. But Jake's kindness and attention had become something she quietly cherished. A week later, something happened that tested that boundary. It was a stormy evening. The rain drummed against the windows, and thunder rolled in the distance. David was still away on a work trip. Jake was in the living room trying to fix the internet router when the power flickered off. Clara came in with candles, smiling through the darkness. "Well, looks like we're going old-fashioned tonight." Jake chuckled. "Guess we'll have to talk instead of scroll." They lit candles around the room, their soft glow casting golden shadows on the walls. It felt peaceful, almost like a scene from another time. They talked for hours about life, regrets, and small joys. Then Jake went quiet. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "can I ask something without it sounding weird?" She nodded cautiously. "Of course." He looked down, hesitating. "Do you ever feel lonely? Like, even when you have people around?" The question caught her off guard. She took a slow breath. "Sometimes," she admitted. Loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about feeling unseen. Jake nodded. Yeah, I get that. Then, after a pause, he said softly, That's why I like talking to you. You actually see me. Clara's heart stirred at his words. She wanted to say something comforting, something motherly, but the sincerity in his tone made her voice catch. Jake, you're a good person, she finally said. You'll always be seen by the right people. Don't lose faith in that. He smiled faintly, his expression gentle but unreadable. Thanks, Clara. That means more than you think. The storm quieted, but the silence that followed was thick, filled with unspoken emotions neither dared to name. After a moment, Clara stood, pretending to tidy up. It's getting late. You should get some rest. Jake nodded, rising from the couch. Good night, Clara. She turned, her voice softer than usual. Good night, Jake. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to untangle the confusion inside her. She cared for Jake deeply, but she knew the importance of boundaries. Her kindness had brought them closer. But now she had to make sure it didn't lead to misunderstanding. The next morning, Clara decided to talk to him. Over breakfast, she said gently, Jake, I want to thank you for trusting me. But I also think it's good if we focus more on your next steps, your career, your plans. You've got a bright future, and I don't want to hold you back by keeping you here too long. He looked surprised but nodded slowly. I understand. I'll miss this though. You've been the best part of this summer. Clara smiled sadly. I'll miss it too. But that's how life works. We move forward. There was quiet respect in his eyes. You're right. But promise me something. She tilted her head. What's that? He smiled gently. That we'll still talk, even when I leave. Her heart softened. Of course, Jake, you can always reach out. When Jake left for his new internship a week later, the house felt emptier. Clara found herself standing in the doorway after he drove away, the echo of his laughter still lingering as she turned back inside. She realized something important. Sometimes love isn't about romance or possession. Sometimes it's simply about connection, understanding, and the courage to care for someone without crossing the lines that keep relationships whole. And for Clara, saying yes to Jake's surprising request hadn't been a mistake. It had been a lesson, a reminder that kindness, when given with sincerity, can change to lives in quiet, lasting ways. That evening, as the sun set over the garden, she whispered to herself, maybe that's what family really means. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt at peace. Autumn came quietly that year. The leaves in the backyard turned shades of gold and red. And the evenings grew cool enough that Clara found herself making tea just to warm her hands. It had been 2 months since Jake left for his internship in Chicago, and though she had filled her days with work, cooking and caring for the house, there were still moments when she'd catch herself thinking of him. Not in a dramatic or forbidden way. It's just the familiar ache of missing someone who had filled the house with life. David was home more now, yet he often seemed distracted. His work had taken a heavier toll lately, and Clara found herself talking to him less. Their conversations had become brief and routine about bills, errands, and family updates. Jake, on the other hand, would call once or twice a week. His voice always carried that same warmth, the same ease that made conversation flow naturally. One evening, while Clara was setting the table for dinner, her phone buzzed. It was Jake. Hey, Clara, he said, his tone lighter than usual. Guess what? I'm coming home next weekend. Her heart skipped a beat. Really? That's wonderful. David will be thrilled. Jake hesitated a second before replying. Yeah, I was hoping to spend some time with both of you, and maybe catch up with you properly too. I've missed talking like we used to. Clara smiled to herself, though she made her voice calm. Of course, Jake. It'll be nice to have you home again. That weekend arrived sooner than expected. When Jake pulled into the driveway, the sight of him made Clara's heart swell with pride. He looked older, somehow more confident, more certain of himself. He hugged her with genuine warmth, and she noticed how naturally that gesture came. "It's good to be back," he said. Dinner that night was lively. David, for once, seemed relaxed. They laughed, shared stories, and Jake spoke about his internship. People he met, the mistakes he made, and the lessons learned. Clara found herself watching him with quiet admiration. He wasn't the uncertain young man from months ago. He was growing into someone strong and kind of reflection, perhaps, of all the encouragement she'd once given him. After dinner, while David went to make a few phone calls, Jake and Clara stayed in the kitchen, cleaning up together. He was humming softly as he washed dishes, and Clara dried them beside him. "You seem happy," she said. He glanced over with a smile. "I am. But I missed home too. Especially you." She paused, caught off guard. "Me?" "Yeah," he said, still smiling but sincere. "You were the one who believed in me when I didn't. That meant a lot, Clara, more than you probably know." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Jake, you did all the work. I just helped a little." He shook his head gently. "You helped me see myself differently. That's not little." His words lingered long after he went upstairs that night. Clara sat on the porch for a while, the cool wind brushing her face. She thought about how strange and beautiful life could be, how people could come into your life not by choice but by chance and still change you in quiet, lasting ways. The next morning, Clara woke early to make breakfast. Jake joined her soon after, wearing a hoodie and messy hair that reminded her of when he was younger. "You never sleep in, do you?" he teased. "Old habits," she laughed. They sat together, eating pancakes and sipping coffee. The conversation turned thoughtful again, as it often did with Jake Clara. He said suddenly, "Do you ever wish life had turned out differently?" She tilted her head. "In what way?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe that you'd done something else, or met someone at a different time. Things like that." Clara smiled faintly. "We all wonder that sometimes, but I've learned not to dwell on what could have been. Every choice we make leads us somewhere, and even the painful ones have meaning." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like something you'd say," he said with a grin. "You always find the right words." She chuckled softly. "That's because I've made enough mistakes to know how they sound when they echo back." The room fell into a comfortable silence after that. But inside, Clara was reflecting on her own words. There had been moments when she'd wondered what her life might have been like if she'd met someone more emotionally present than David, someone who listened, who noticed. But those were fleeting thoughts, like passing clouds. What mattered was the present, being kind, being grounded, being true. Later that evening, David suggested they all watch a movie. The three of them sat together in the living room. Jake sat on one end of the couch, Clara on the other, with David in the middle. Yet, even with that small distance, she could feel the calm energy of Jake's presence beside her. It wasn't tension anymore. It was comfort, familiar and unspoken. When the movie ended, David yawned and excused himself, heading to bed early. Jake stayed behind, still half lost in thought. "That movie hit harder than I expected," he said. "It did," Clara agreed. There was a quiet moment before Jake spoke again. "Clara, I need to tell you something." She turned toward him, concerned. "What is it?" He hesitated, struggling for words. "You've been more than just my stepmother. You've been my guide, my friend. I don't know how to thank you properly for that." Her eyes softened. "You don't have to thank me. Family takes care of each other." He smiled gently, but there was something deeper in his expressions, something he didn't say aloud. "I know, but still, I'll always be grateful. You changed how I see people, how I see myself." Clara felt her throat tighten. "You've changed too, Jake. You've grown into someone I'm proud of." He looked away briefly, composing himself. "You have no idea what that means to hear." When he left the next morning, the house felt heavy again, but this time, Clara didn't feel lonely. She felt proud. What they had built between them wasn't confusion. It was understanding. It was proof that love could exist in many forms, some too deep and complex to label. Over the next few months, Jake called less frequently, but every call carried the same warmth. He told her about his new friends, his work, and eventually about a girl he had started seeing. Clara listened with genuine happiness. There was no jealousy, no sadness, just quiet contentment. Life was moving forward as it should. When spring came, Jake returned home for a visit. He arrived with flowers in hand and a calm, grown-up smile. "These are for you," he said, handing her a bouquet of daisies. Clara laughed softly. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," he said. "You're the reason I've become who I am today." They spent that weekend together with David, cooking, laughing, and talking about the future. Everything felt balanced now, peaceful. Clara had learned to let go of what she couldn't control and to cherish what she could: connection, family, kindness. On Jake's last night home, he and Clara stepped outside to watch the stars. The sky was clear and the night was warm. "Strange," Jake said. "How much can change in a year?" "It is," Clara agreed. "But that's life. It keeps teaching us things even when we think we've learned enough." He smiled softly. "You're still my favorite teacher." She laughed lightly. "Then promise me you'll keep learning." "I will," he said. "Always." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the night sky. Then Jake turned toward her, his expression calm but full of emotion. "I'll never forget what you did for me, Clara. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." That kind of love stays with a person forever. Clara felt tears well in her eyes, but she smiled through them. "Then make sure you pass it on, Jake. That's how love keeps moving." He nodded slowly. "I will." When Jake left the next morning, Clara stood at the doorway once more, just as she had before. But this time, there was no ache in her chest, only peace. She understood now that sometimes the most meaningful connections in life aren't romantic at all. They're built on care, respect, and shared growth. As the car disappeared down the road, Clara whispered softly to herself, "You did good, Jake. You really did." And as she closed the door behind her, she realized that life had given her something far more valuable than she had expected. Not excitement, not passion, but quiet fulfillment. It was a reminder that love, in its truest form, is not about possession or longing. It's about helping someone become who they're meant to be, and feeling grateful that, for a little while, you got to be part of their story.